Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar will be about assembling robots in Clip Studio Paint, March of Robots 2020 edition, presented and hosted by DaCosta Bayley. Before we begin the webinar, there are some housekeeping items that we'd like to go through. The webinar will be approximately 1 hour long. All attendees will be muted. Question and answer session will be during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Attendees can ask questions in the GoToWebinar question box right away. Due to time constraint, not all questions will be answered. Webinar will be recorded. Recording will be shared on social media and will be sent via email to all registrants and attendees. Panelists are Fahim Nias, Joanna Brower, Mary Quinones, myself, and DaCosta Bayley. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time and have never heard about Clip Studio Paint is an all-in-one solution for stunning, ready-to-publish illustrations, comics, manga, and animations. Learn more about Clip Studio Paint on clipstudiopaint.net/n and Graphixly.com. And with that, we'd like to pass the reins of the webinar over to DaCosta Bayley, who will begin his presentation.
All right, thanks, Mario. Thanks everyone for joining in. It's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So I'd like to start by basically introducing myself. I'm obviously DaCosta Bayley, an illustrator, freelance designer living in Vancouver, Canada, and I've been working for embarrassingly a long time, maybe 25 years doing this. So it's great to have a space to just be able to contribute my thoughts and ideas when it comes to being online and showing process. What I'm going to start out with is just a little point, just a little dedication to a fellow named Sid Mead, who passed away recently at the end of last year. He's just a really big influence on my life and my design style. So this is some work he did. Obviously, this is one of my favorite anime pieces, and it's a Gundam, but he did a thing called Turn A, and it was just very, very big for me. So it's great. I got all of my seam lines you'll see throughout my work from him. So that was a big deal. So just to show a little some stuff what I'm doing, back in 2014 I started doing a little drawing competition or event, kind of just a challenge for myself. And this is some of the elements that I've been working on for that. And so this is a piece that was inspired by Miyazaki Hayao film Castle in the Sky, or Laputa. It's basically there's a robot version in there of a kind of a protector, and so I just did my version of that. And I'll just go through the pieces, and you can see the ideas. This is inspired by bugs in general, and most of the ideas are pretty straightforward and just come off pretty quick. I don't spend too much time thinking about them. So I just like to roll through the ideas and try to tell a little story. So this is really what I'm talking about today, is how to think, when I'm doing these designs, and that's not really much about drawing. I think you can learn drawing from anybody. My lines are the same as probably anybody else's lines, but it's really about, what I feel is a topic to focus on, or how I love making certain shapes, bringing out the volumes and trying to express my ideas through the image. This is another piece that was done, and I love space. I'm a huge futurist. I love the idea of a positive future, and love to see where things are going. And that's why I love technology. It's why robots are something I'm passionate about. It's another piece that really, obviously speaks to kind of the waste of technology and discarding of things that we make some more recent piece. Just a lot of fun. Try to capture some dynamics and the energy in a robot form, and really kind of get a sense of urgency. This piece is called Jailbreak. It's just kind of funny to me that he's running for his quote unquote life. A little humorous piece that I did. Basically, it's kind of speaks for itself. It's just the idea of anything with technology can be a power. So it's somehow this fish has worked his way up through the echelons and now has enough presence to have a driver. Some fun exploration. The closer mentioned piece before was just the idea of this wonderment of space and the future. And this is a more recent piece that I did. Really just exploration of form. Really was an old ink piece. I do a lot of work that sometimes I do half drawings and put them away. And this is a great way to kind of get something down on paper and out of your head. And then you come back to it later and revisit and do some more exploration and you'll find that, you have new ideas and new interpretations of the piece that you're working on. And it takes you in great places. I get a lot of questions about the forms and where I get my inspiration from. And probably the biggest driver for me is nature. Nature is infinitely fascinating, especially insects. There are so many ideas and forms that just happen. Evolution is an amazing thing. And so I say because my forms are very kind of organic, and as much as they're hard surfacey things, I like a lot of flow and like them to feel kind of smooth and very appealing. So part of that is making sure that the forms are very, very welcoming. So I looking at, some of these animals, whether it's, the pangolin or these beetles or the wasp. I mean, they're just fascinating forms to study. And I suggest anybody, instead of looking at other, typically people tend to want to look at other robots and other things. If you're designing cars, people go and look at cars, and that's a great thing to see what's out there. But when it comes to finding your voice and really kind of shaping the idea that you want to see, it's great to kind of find other sources that are related, but inspiring in other ways. And you can see a lot when you study what nature has done, because these are all adapting. Robots are about designing for a function and a purpose. So when it comes to designing form and function, it's crucial that, those things need to be. It's nice when they're married together and there's a beautiful balance. So trying to mimic that idea, obviously the function is important because that's the primary push for the design. But then it's nice if it looks good. Nobody wants a ugly piece of technology. And so just more exploration and understanding of the variety of forms. And one of the things about robots that people find difficult actually is that robots, unlike kind of organic surfaces, they're pretty absolute in terms of the way you have to have parts interact, right? There's a logic involved. So hard shell animals, anything with an exoskeleton, they have to be able to negotiate the parts as it's moving, because everything is armored. It's not like a human or a flesh elbow where it just bends. So you have to think about the connectivity of these parts, and how they relate to one another. So this is the piece, and I'll make apologies for the graphics issues. So this is one of the pieces that I did, just kind of really super inspired by inchworms. I don't know why I like them so much, but obviously you can see the form on the left is the classic inchworm on some carpet. But then I took that and really just mechanized everything and really tried to keep the seam lines that run across it, and really try to keep the flavor of what that needs to be, so it communicates the idea instantly. When you look at it, you realize that it's an inchworm. So there's no confusion there. And one of the main things that I find that people always have trouble with is joint language, and how to make it feel realistic. So I mean, this is and by means, whenever I'm telling you is kind of my interpretation of things. There are certain elements that are fact. Robots are real. You know, they're one of the genre, one of the elements of genre. You know, science fiction that ever become real. Vampires aren't going to be a thing. Dinosaurs, you know, questionably not going to be a thing. You know, zombies, no, but robots are an actual thing that have stepped out of the world of fiction and into the world of reality. So when it comes to designing these elements, there's a lot of things you have to take into consideration, you know, from how cartoony you want to be to how realistic and believable. And part of that is the joint language. So there's the basic ideas of the limbs and how they work. So you've got this limb here, you know, which is a tube, and it's basically very cartoony. There's no need to really explore or explain what it does. It's just a crink joint, which is not a real joint, but that's what it is. And then of course you've got your classic uh, arm bender style, where it's a tube, and the tube can be flexible, and you can make an octopus, or you can do whatever you want with that, and kind of idea, whether it's and these all these principles apply to whether it's an arm or a leg. They carry across, and then you have also this spherical socket with floating limbs, so that obviously in speaking at levels of technology, to take into consideration when you're designing, there are things to, you know, what is the technology that works with this. If you're working on something that's like a steampunk, so you have very kind of deliberate joints, so you have a lot of pivots, you can have all of these elements, but the magnetics, you know, you probably have to really explain that into be really clearly that your steampunk idea will support floating and anti-gravity kind of idea. Um, so usually the spherical socket is the easiest kind of one to kind of get away with in terms of being able to show something very physical, very deliberate. And then so this is an exterior kind of ball socket, obviously held together more magnetically than anything else inside of here, because you would normally have it where it's buried inside, so that this rim actually holds the ball in place. And then the next arm, obviously here, extended down, is a rotational joint. And that's basically what I like to focus on. And what I'm talking about here are rotational joints and twisting joints. And then we can talk about revolving joints. But that's a whole other webinar. It can get really crazy when it comes to types of joints, linear joints, and blah, blah, blah. So right now, for me, just focusing on just to explain a real basic idea of when you're drawing things is how to understand the joint you're using. And both of these joints, be them rotational, are set differently. So this is the first one here. You'll find is it's more like a Y joint, right? So you have an insert of the piece, and then you still have your rotational axis around the center elbow per se. And then this is a side by side. The second one is a side by side, whereas you still have the exact same rotational idea, but it's offset in a different way. And you find most, you know, if you look at kind of the Canada arm or some of the, you know, easy robotics or automotive robotics kind of work in that way. It's an easy place to offset, because you have to have a motor to drive these things. So you know, where that placement happens is really important, and is something to really take into consideration when you're working on these designs. And so the next off of that is, you know, at the end of the limb, I didn't do any feet, so there's not going to be a foot slide, but because you get the idea. But the idea here is you know, when you're designing, obviously it's a level of cartooniness versus reality, as I said before. And hands versus pincers / clamps. These are things you have to take into consideration, and understanding of the function of the piece anatomy that will dictate kind of your design, your solutions for the design challenges that you have, and how you propose. And then the combination of all these elements kind of coming together are what really kind of sell your story. So I'm going to start off with a piece. This is a piece I did. This is a combination of many things I'll be posting online, but this is kind of just a variety sample of kind of ideas, just random thoughts that I've had over the last couple of days to put together for this, and I can focus in on one specifically. So let's talk about initially. Let's talk about the captain here, the captain of the guard, and he starts out. He's multiple layers. I tend to work very simply, and I don't have a lot of tricks in terms of when I put things together. My process is pretty straightforward, not that different than drawing in a real book. I'm not a concept artist with implied forms or anything. I just draw straight. This is a shape, and this is how it goes, and I try to keep it as simple as possible. Because the more I find, the more tricks that you use, the more convoluted the image tends to be, which is great if if you're doing in production design. There's a place for all of that in terms of expressing an idea and working and collaborating with other people. But when I'm kind of selfishly developed a technique that's just all about me and the way I want to draw and what I needed to communicate quite quickly. So just to go here, so this is where this drawing kind of starts. It's super ugly. There's a lot of finding lines, as they're called, which are lines that I just draw things, and I just let them kind of happen. And I want to see, what shape looks good. And basically, obviously, I've laid down kind of this idea of how big I need this gun to be, or tell you the truth, that this was driven by the fact that I needed something that was a variation on the others, or different from the other drawings. But I was really actually trying to fill um, the space that was left on the canvas. So oops, that was basically what I was trying to do, is fill up that space with the character. So that was, which funny enough is probably the minimum amount of deriver that you need to say, okay, this is the design brief, fill this space. And so I went with this kind of form. So to get back to that, we'll see. Like I said, the idea is that I was just looking for a form, and I thought, oh, this is important to try to create something that shows an idea, tells a little bit of a story, and you wonder what he's doing or who this character is. And so from there, I'll break it down and go back onto my other form, the other image. And then this image is made up of very few layers, to tell you the truth. So the first thing I really lay in is obviously I get to the line work. And then once the line work is kind of solidified, and I think, okay, this is a great form, and I've managed to negotiate all of the elements that feel good, whether it's the size of the hand or the boots, and then the first thing actually, the concept for this was just a big chunky mech with chunky parts, was the idea. So I wanted to kind of make something that had a lot of presence and had a lot of power, but was appealing to look at, because I love friendly forms, and I think it's, from a video game perspective, I'm not a big designer of war things, but I love machines that allow you to, exploration in worlds that look fun. So from there, I'm throwing in, I'm trying to make the color, and the color is actually done in multiple parts, because from my process, I hate and love doing color because there's so many choices, but there aren't that many choices. I mean, there are only 7 colors in the rainbow, plus or minus, right? So if you do enough stuff, you realize, if you look at the options you actually have, saturation and and all the rest of that, sometimes I get caught up in how I want to have an infinite variety, but I feel like I can be limited. So sometimes I really don't know where to start. So I really start by, number one, deciding what's gray, and then I put down the gray first, which actually becomes a layer. And then I work from there. The flat of the whole thing becomes the base tone. So whatever color you put in, and I don't care what it is. It could be super hot pink. It just needs to take up the space and start filling in what I see. And then when I decide where the metal is, and the metal can be any color, I just decide that it's going to be gray for the most part. That helps immediately break up the form, and it lets me move forward. So the next thing I do on top of that, because I want to get kind of to the end quickly, is I start building on the shadows, because the shadow automatically gives me awesome form, and it lets me really see what's happening. It brings it to life, and I can move quickly through. It's like, okay, I'm getting more inspired because I've seen the drawing too long. This piece probably took me 3 hours by the time I finished noodling with it, and then pushing things around and making small adjustments, redrawing the boots a couple of times. So then once the shadows are in, and then that's set to a multiply layer. Most of the time, I either use a kind of a lavender color or kind of an ochre orangey yellow kind of color, depending on what the background is, and that will change the way the shadow relates or shows the background, plays through the colors. And after that, I set in, this is my accent color. So effectively, this is my main light, and then I'm just highlighting, accenting my key light to really bring out the form and show kind of rich volume and what's happening, and especially I use a lot of rounded forms. So these are the things that I try to focus on, and that is usually always set to an add layer. So if I change that, and I hope you can see my cursor, but if there's add glow is actually what it should be set to. It works for this scenario, and you can see that small change makes a huge difference on whether it feels more like a matte surface, or whether it feels like it's a little more lustery, and obviously it warms up the light and plays off of the cooler shadow. From there, I then end up adding the rim light, so the accent light from the background, usually just to highlight forms and bring out elements that I think kind of really make it pop. And you can see the difference. And then from there, it's really about the accent glowy bits. And, those are the part, that's when I get to the glowy bits, I'm super happy. And I think that this is where the drawing is kind of done, and then classically, I like to throw a frame around it just to kind of accent what it's doing, the motion. So your eye kind of travels, and you start at the ground and you move up. So anything that really makes it appealing and kind of frames the whole piece, to kind of bring everything together. So then we can look at the girl. So this drawing is interesting as well. I mean, we don't have to go into it. All these drawings are done exactly the same way. So it's really this character. I love this character, but I probably have to do something with this character in terms of a graphic novel or something. Her little dog bot and the expression on her face, and I think she's very playful. But it's just this idea of trying to do something that captures a character. I had a discussion actually once with someone at a broadcaster, and I won't name any names or anything, but I was pitching a show, and one of the things they said to me is, it's like, why you only do robots, and then, do you have anything else? Because we're not really sure that kids will connect with robots. It's, and I said, well, I said, to tell you that honestly, I said it's 100% BS, because I don't know what kids imagine that think that they're dinosaurs. They don't have any way to relate to that, in the same way. It's really about how the character on the screen how does the character emote? That's the thing. You can put a stick on screen, and if it's done the right way, animated and written in the right way, anybody can connect to it. So I think this is one of the things, but people assume that robots and technology are cold, but I find that completely the wrong way of thinking about it. It's really about what we put into it. So this character um, I think she's very appealing, and I'd love to explore this idea. But she was done in the exact same way as the captain. She has her base layer done as a file. I'll turn it all off, and you can see. So you can see as the layers that have built up, and they're all quite independent until you get the line in there, and you can see the difference between just the standard forms, which is one way of illustrating. I just, for this particular thing, I love illustrated line. I love that form. Painting without line is very appealing to me, but I love the kind of cartoons and graphic nature of the line. So when you're adding in the line, really brings the form together, and it's less processy for me. I think the line is very satisfying right away. Um, so this character, anyways, it's just a great thing to come up with something that excites you when you draw it, because many people, I'm sure, as you go through, if you're kind of an aspiring artist, or you want to tell a story, you want to do all these things, it's really about the finding your voice and your confidence, and what do I draw and how do I do this, and there's a lot of things that the process can be daunting at times, so you don't want to do it or whatever, so you have to find those elements, and it's a very isolated idea being an artist. You're painting and you're thinking by yourself. I spend a lot of time in my head. So, when I'm communicating the ideas and I'm building these worlds, you get lost, and it's wonderful. And it's nice when you find something that you can really connect with, and it starts to, you hope that if it's inspiring you and you want to tell the story, that I can maybe reach out to somebody and connect with somebody else, can connect with this character, and they can really like it. So that's part of the thing that I like to really kind of communicate, because all of this comes together and kind of has real world applications, um, because there's a thing called STEAM out in the world, and that's basically kind of this idea of science, technology, engineering, uh, and liberal arts and mathematics, and that's teaching young people and anyone who's learning, but in the educational system specifically, about taking the science and technology, engineering and math, and then bringing it together with the liberal arts, and really solving a lot of the world's problems, and creating things to put into the world, right? I mean, it's all these elements have to work together. So the idea of me creating kind of appealing robots and telling stories with those robots, future forward looking, um, is me trying to contribute to that kind of idea. Because if you see this stuff all day, every day, and you see robots, to me, in acting out in regular life, and then you start to accept it, right? It's this idea they're not foreign anymore. So if I just had a daughter a year ago, and so I want to make things that are important to her, and she sees this idea as like, oh, these are commonplace, not some kind of weird thing that I don't want to talk about, right? Or I don't want to have any part of it. Robots and coding and all these elements are really important. So that's why I love the positive ideas I like to put out, and I want to make sure that it's communicated that way, because I think that there's a lot of negativity for the most part, and people think they have really kind of straightforward ideas about what technology is going to be and what the future is going to be. And most of it, as you see, watch any movie, none of it starts out, or ends, or usually in the middle. Actually, it's always the crappy part. But people's view of the future is always kind of negative. So I want to bring that out, because I love, growing up in the 80s. I love Astro Boy. I love Robotech. I love all these things. And the one thing about the designs is funny is Robotech is, in case anybody doesn't know, it's an animation that was done back in the 80s in Japan. It was a Japanese anime, but it's just about war, right? Basically, and it's a love story, but based in the theater of war. So all of these ideas that coming together, I love anything that kind of brings and celebrates the positivity and looking forward. Um, that's why I want to keep doing what I'm doing. So to look at these other two characters, these are some other elements, that questions that I get all the time about kind of, these things can be anything. So looking at this the green robot here, basically on the far right, is basically just an exploration. There's a movie called The Black Hole that was done by Walt Disney, and there was a character named Maximilian. So this is kind of Maximilian-ish, but it's really me explaining and showing the idea of a form and how to use shadow to bring out that form, and then all the little uh, guts bits inside that really make it interesting and show you what the character does. Now, obviously, this character is not going to bend at the waist if you want to talk about anatomical needs, right, in terms of the functionality. But he doesn't have any arms, and he's got two stumpy little floating thighs. So I'm not really sure what he does in general. But and then obviously the other character has no limbs whatsoever. He's just a lollipop character, and it's just funny. It's more inspired by the little pin that we put in virtual maps, but and then a lollipop, because I think I happened to be at Starbucks at the time, and the cake pops are crazy. So that's not a plug for Starbucks, just the cake pops. Yeah, and that was just a really fun exploration, and you can see that the variation in line as well, and then the quality of the line, it doesn't really matter. So it's amazing how when you draw something rough, and then you just splash a little color in it, automatically the line just is there to help sell the rest of it, but the color is really what takes over, and is kind of the main thing to focus on. And once you start adding in the color and the shadow, it really brings it to life, and that's really where the energy kind of comes from. So, and one of the things you'll notice also is the difference between the characters, this character's innards with the mechanical bits, versus this lollipop character has a kind of a graphic display. It's all very 70s, 70s behind the glass, kind of blinky lights, So that's another way to, or one way to express the level of technology that you're playing with as well. So I'm a big fan of anything blinky lights anywhere. So it's almost impossible for me to do a drawing without it. So now I'm going to jump into the March of Robots. The actual event is happening now, and today is the second day. Man, holy cow! March of Robots I started back in 2014 officially, as a response to Jake Parker's Inktober, which I found very inspiring, and I just foolishly thought I could just do something privately by myself on Instagram. And then it was called Bottober at the time, but then there was a crazy influx of Tobers, Sketchtober, Drawtober, Monstober, everything Tober. So I decided 2013 I was going to jump out, and 2014 rolled around, and I said, okay, March of Robots seems like a fun place, and there was nothing else happening at the time. So I started to do that. So basically, it's a community drawing challenge. It's 31 days, 31 robots. Original designs. They can be digitally drawn. They can be analog. You could 3D sculpt them if you really wanted to. It doesn't really matter. I think you could make them out of plasticine, whatever it is. It's about people coming together to celebrate this idea of creativity and expression around the theme of robots. So a couple of years back, I got a lot of requests for a prompt list. So I started putting together prompt lists, and I don't really use them all the time. Sometimes they're fun, and they're really great if you need a little inspiration. And it's great when somebody says design something. It's really complicated to get down to it, but it's a challenge, right? It is the blank page. But so when I put out the prompt list, that gives you something to start from, and it can be anything. So it doesn't, chunky can be anything you want, right? It could be chunky boots, it could be a chunky head, it could be, a robot eating a chunky chocolate chip cookie. It doesn't really matter. I think it's really about you wanting to tell the story with the inspiration of the word for the day. So I would love anyone who's out there to join in and come on by and participate. What do you think, Joanna?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love for everyone to participate because there seems to be just an endless amount of tiny, cute robots that need to be out there in the world.
No, that I totally agree. I think I can never have enough cute cuddly robots.
Yeah. So that brings me to a very important question. How did you start just with the robots? Did you try anything else?
Oh yeah, I've drawn tons of stuff. I just found that I looked back over all the stuff, and the thing that excited me. I mean, you draw people, but then there's always a robot in the scene, or robots were fascinating. The one thing about robots that I find amazing is that they're basically kind of a mirror to ourselves, right? I mean, robots are designed or developed and then they're put out into the world, and then their job is just to collect data
Hmm.
and assess the environment and um, and kind of grow, right? So that you go through. If you were a robot, you're going through life and you're modifying. Oh, my arm needs to change, or I need to upgrade my software, or I need to, get bigger boots. I need to do something. So it's kind of we do that as we go through life. So, kind of robot's journey through life is really about, if you watch a little baby or any individual kind of growing and learning, robots are just a wonderful thing. And I just like the forms and the stories I'm able to tell. It's interesting because I think that it's kind of like when people, if you want to tackle a topic, kind of sending a message about something, it's great when you can, use little animals or something that's not human. The message tends to get heard better. So I
Hmm.
just happen to like robots. A lot of people out there drawing zombies and everything else. It's just super appealing to me. I just, it's
Yeah.
as simple as that. Robots are cool.
Yeah. Do you look at like real robots from Boston Dynamics?
Oh yeah, I look at everything. Like I said, robots are the one thing, that you have to kind of pay attention to a little bit. If the way I design, I have to pay attention to functionality because if I do stuff for a video game, it has to work for the most part, depending on, the level of video games. Kind of now you can't hide. Like back in the day, old school Transformers, everything was super boxy. And if you were ever a kid trying to make a robot suit out of cardboard boxes, you realize how fast those joints don't work. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, so you can't put a box and a box touching each other to try to make an elbow joint. It's just impossible.
Hmm.
So it's just kind of this idea of, looking at other robots and seeing what actually needs to be a thing is great because that is kind of a real world driver, right? And then
Hmm.
looking at other people's interpretations is interesting as well because that those are not necessarily driven by any kind of real logic, but it's nice to explore form, and see what other people's thinking, um, where it's at.
Hmm. Um, when you design a robot, do you start with the purpose or with the shape?
I think it's both. It depends on if I'm, Sunday and I'm drinking a cup of tea and doing nothing, then sometimes I'm just doodling and a form happens, But most of the time for me, I'm usually inspired by something. Like I want to tell a story. And so I start to kind of shape it to go, it needs to be this or it needs to be that. Um, and then I start, that becomes my design brief, right? Because
Hmm.
like I said before, if you just have a blank page, it's really intimidating. You don't know which direction to go. But if you start to create limits um, and purpose for the thing, like, oh, I have to create a robot that it's a scuba diving robot and it looks for gold and it's on a moon or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's kind of this idea of other planet, water planet of some sort. Then you say, okay, I have to do this and I have to do that. And then once that is kind of done, what it looks like actually at the end with the shell that you wrap it in, that's another deal. And that also has to do with form and function,
Hmm.
but for the most part, it's the function and it's everything kind of at once. And there's necessarily no first rule that happens in terms of where you start.
Yeah. So how, excuse me, how far do you go in terms of imagining a story for each individual robot?
I go pretty far. I mean, for the actual illustration, I usually try to stop it there because I have a backlog in my head of other things that need to get out. But if it's something like that character, Sora, which is her name,
Mm.
and then the little dog. That once that drawing's kind of done, I start imagining kind of her purpose and potentially where she is. And if I feel, I write everything down, and I kind of make a little bit of a kind of a brief description for myself, and then I put it down and I come back to it a little later, and if I feel I have the same passion for it, and I start to explore it a little bit more and start to write quite quickly.
Yeah. Has any of this ever gone into like a private work of a graphic novel or anything like that?
Yeah, I did a short film a couple of years ago that was done with a company called Nimble Collective, and then I was invited by one of the founders to participate in the pilot program, and he wanted to fund a short film and any ideas I had. So I created a little thing. I had some drawings that I'd done of two characters that were kind of interesting, but they were more exploration in style than anything else. I just wanted to see if I could, how to draw robots that look like they came out of the same factory, basically, right? They exist in the same world.
Hmm.
And I used kind of Sonny and Gerd. They were named Sonny, and they are named Sonny and Gerd, but I used Ernie and Bert from Sesame Street as kind of the inspiration of their personalities, and then I designed from there. So we did the short film, and it's really developing the story and the world. So when I did that story initially, it was a great little drawing, and then I said, okay, well, if I have to make a film, then I'm going to try to write a synopsis and do a brief for a film, the whole feature film kind of idea. And then I broke that back down into kind of a TV show. And then I broke that back down into a short film and little episodes. And so that was how that kind of came together. And so that was interesting. And I'd love to explore that. And I did a VR pitch for it as well to kind of extend the world. And so there's a whole thing wrapped around that. So I'm excited about that.
Hmm. Very cool. Let's go a bit more into the technical side of your work because we have some art questions.
Mhm.
So for one, you explained a bit about the 3D shapes in space.
Mhm.
And have you ever worked in 3D with your robots personally?
Yeah, I've worked in 3D. My 3D skills are horrible. I've done a lot of work in VR. I find
Hmm.
it's a fantastic place to get the ideas out because it's so immediate. So and the VR, and I've used Medium. I'm starting to dabble into Gravity Sketch. So I think I think the immersive element, the component of VR is fantastic, and it allows me to shape things quite quickly. So that's where I'm headed.
Okay, very cool. Um, how do you keep the balance of the robots in terms of detail and weight?
It just, I think I don't know if there's a rule. I mean, there might be a rule. So I'm self-taught. So anything I'm telling you is just me kind of guessing at how things kind of really
That's
go.
fine.
Again, I didn't go to school to say, like, I had a teacher tell me all this stuff and I'm just kind of regurgitating it in my style, which I wish I had sometimes because it would be a lot easier.
Hmm.
So I think the balance is it's really about feel, right? I mean, I think when you're putting an idea together, it has to look, you know, it has to feel good when you're doing it. So the weights have to transfer. I mean, and there's no people, there are some classic rules, the 70-30 and 80-20, whatever golden ratios, yada, yada, yadas. But I think, if you look at something and it feels good, the level of detail it's really what you need it to be. So if it's supposed to be kind of light and cartoony, if you're looking at something from, let's say, like Calvin and Hobbes, then you're only going to put so much detail into it right before it starts to pull itself out of the world. But if
Hmm.
you're looking at designing something for Star Wars, then you're going to need a certain amount of, like, everything in Star Wars has a certain amount of grit and scratches and grime and panels, and that you can understand that there's a need for people to do maintenance on robots, right? So, Calvin and Hobbes, you just have one panel, one simple thing. You're not worried about hinges. You're not worried about all this other stuff. So it's really about whatever you determine the finish level needs to be, whatever the world it exists in. That's what usually determines how far you go, assuming that you have control over your noodling gene, because I like to noodle forever.
So for those who don't know, noodling is the process of spending forever on details.
Yeah, and then all the way through, it doesn't matter, all the way
Yeah.
through. So
Yeah.
classically, I'm one of these people who I don't do a lot of iterative work. So
Mm.
iterative work is, you'll have a robot design or a character design, and then people will do 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 of them, and there'll be such minute changes. I hate looking at those things. I can't tell. It's like looking for a Where is Waldo. I can't really tell
Yeah.
what's different. So I started kind of in this idea of industrial design and architecture. So the moves have to be kind of bold for me when it comes to
Mm.
what the changes are. But I tend to look at one drawing and sculpt it. You know what I mean? And I do a little sketch draw over top of it, and drop the opacity and refine the form as opposed to starting again. So
Mm.
that helps a little bit for me because I want to dial it in quite quickly.
Yeah.
Because there are an infinite amount of kind of solutions almost to any particular challenge. I think you can go many directions. This could be that, and that can be this. But at some point, you have to realize that you know pretty much any answer that you come up with that feels great is probably a good one.
Hmm. To go into Club Studio a little bit, what kind of brushes do you usually use for drawing your robots?
This is going to be super boring, but I literally have um, less than 5 brushes. So and I use one pencil all the time, and it's just this pencil. I think it actually came out of one of the packs that we're giving away, right? Um,
Mm.
and it's just pencil number 4. Um, but I tend to open this window. Oh, sorry, this resolution's killing me. Sorry. Um, even all of these, I thrown away. I throw away every brush almost that I get. I want to start from a naked palette. Um,
Hmm.
so I use the G for inking. It's a lot of G pen. I
Hmm.
think it's called the G pen. And then um, is it even in here? Sorry, this is
Not.
a new setup, and I'm trying to. Yeah, so the G pen and this cross hatching thing, I don't even
Mm.
use it. But I tend to. I have very little. So the G pen. This is the only this inker. I haven't emptied out the inker yet because it's crazy. There's so much good stuff in there. And I have one dense watercolor brush. I like to keep it super simple. Yeah, because I find that the more distracting all the tools and everything, it gets unnecessarily complicated. And I love graphic line. So it's easy for me to focus when I have a limited amount of tools. So the G pen and then that pencil number 4 and pencil number 7.
Hmm.
When the pencil number 7 is not even necessary. So that's literally it. And
Yeah.
even when it comes to painting, I use flat color most of the time, and then one airbrush. Super simple. You can find it in any program. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
and then, but other than this, there's a pointillism brush that's in Clip Studio
Yeah.
that I did a short film pitch, and it had this kind of, you ever see those birds, and I think it's in Italy, and they come out and they swirl and they
Yeah.
And this
Yeah.
brush
Yeah.
does exactly that thing, and I wish I had that brush. So now I'm going to go revisit this project and actually use this brush. It's amazing.
Oh, very cool. So, you do a lot of your work mostly for Instagram, and you have your coloring book and stuff like that. So, do you ever work with vectors for printing, or do you mostly work on regular layers?
No, right? No, I'm trying to get more into. I come from an illustrator point of
Mm.
school of thinking. So I used to do tons of vector, and I still do a lot of vector. Um, that's my main shtick actually. So
Mm.
the thing I love about Clip Studio is it has the vector tool in it, which I really love the crisp line, and I do a lot of work that needs to be scaled. So instead of working at some ridiculous resolution, for a piece, it's great to have the vectors to work
Mm.
on, and my style allows you can't really tell the difference whether I'm using raster images or vector because of the
Mm.
style I work in. So that's the great thing about it. So that's why, I don't want to say I hate Adobe, but I just love I love what Clip Studio brings to the table. It's fantastic in terms of the flexibility. And then I'm starting to explore the short film, Sonny and Gerd. The comic, the comic thing is just
Mm.
amazing to me. So I'm really excited to explore storytelling with
Yeah.
Clip Studio.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Do you create a color palette for a specific robot once you have the idea, or do the colors evolve while you're drawing?
The colors evolve if it stays as a separate drawing. Again, it's really about what you want to end up using it for. So I think the color palette, as to say, this is a robot that's supposed to be law enforcement, or it's supposed to be a research vehicle, or it's some kind of recreational. So now it's got stickers all over it and something crazy. So that develops as I'm going along. But then if the story evolves, and have robots, let's say you have a story of three characters who all have their own robots. All of a sudden, you have to design. You have a need now to design color palette for each character and to make them stand out. And then, but it still has to be harmonious, right? So you kind of noodle and you tweak until it kind of, if there's a binding element, like they all work for the same place, or if they're a ragtag bunch of characters that came together, so you can see they came from different places. It depends on what they speak to. If one guy was born in the jungles of Belize and then another person is born in Reykjavik, you know what I mean, and then somebody from outer space, and all the color palettes would be different, right?
Yeah. So, but you try to stick to like certain colors for like one particular robot. And do you have like a color limit that you wouldn't go over? Like a lot of them are like really focused.
No, again, I think it depends. If I'm doing an 80s robot, then it's going to be 80s crazy neon everywhere, right? And then if it's supposed to be a dark kind of stealthy robot, you stick with the muted dark tones, and then kind of whether how saturated or desaturated, depending on the tone of the overall world. You know what I mean? You can
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
So I think, yeah, it really is driven by whatever the need happens to be. But the palette is, like I said earlier, there are only actually 7 colors to choose from. So for me, it's a little daunting to figure out how to do something more original. Even just doing this poster for March of Robots every year is kind of annoying because I have to figure out a new color combo. But yeah, it's really about kind of making sure that you're not going too far, because a little is a lot.
Hmm.
And if you go overboard, then you can't put all of the great ideas into one drawing, because then you could only do one drawing.
Yeah, yeah.
So save it for later. There'll be more.
Yes, definitely. How long does it usually take you to create like one robot? Just a very general average.
Yeah, I guess, okay, so assuming that the end result is kind of a print quality
Hmm.
deal and factoring in an additional hour for noodling, probably I've spent minimum 40 minutes to an hour on a drawing, and it's been, holy cow, that's amazing. And then other times I'm banging my head for 5 hours.
Oh.
But it depends on the detail, right? And then how finished it needs to be. Like I did some work for a film festival here as the art director, and I think the first things I ever did were a stack of 9 robots, and each one from start to finish took me 18 hours.
Oh my God.
So to go from the sketch, and I had to unify them all together, and they had to be very diverse in their
Mm.
look. And then each one of those, the majority of that time, once they finished the design, they actually got printed 8 feet tall. So doing them in vector meant that I had to make sure that every point was connected and there was no flaws.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Or because you make a
Yeah,
mistake, you blow it up 8 feet tall, you're going to see it really clearly.
yeah, yeah.
So it depends on the need, and I will never do that again. And plus I'm much faster. But yeah, I think it took me from sketch to kind of to vector final render. Prepping the file took me 16 to 18 hours each one.
Hmm. Wow, that it's always a bit scary seeing like art that goes so big, and you try not to like spend too much time on perfecting lines, and then they
No, no,
get
totally.
blown up so big, and you're like, oh my God, the line's not perfect.
Yeah, if you have it, I've seen. I went to, I think my first trip to Japan. I walked by a store that had, it was a a manga store, and then on the outside was giant. I think they had to be at least like 8 feet tall, but all the illustrations of the characters, all the pencil lines I could see.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They weren't super tight inked. They were
Hmm.
rough pencil, and all the color was beautiful. but they love left the texture of the pencil,
Yeah.
the digital pencil, and I thought that was amazing because I didn't even notice it until I noticed it.
Hmm.
So I think depending on how you're working, I said you splash color on the simplest of drawings and it comes to life.
Hmm.
The volume starts to become a thing, and it really the lines kind of fade away, and then the piece is just there in front of you.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question that is, what type of robot would you be if you were to draw yourself as a robot?
Oh man, what kind of robot? That's a I don't know. I don't think I've ever drawn myself as a robot. That's hilarious. Um, I think that's a good question. I'd probably realistically I need a I'd probably be a multi-armed robot, so I could have so for sure I'd have to have at least 4 arms to do multiple illustrations. It's funny thing is like it's the one thing where if you're a robot, then why do you need to draw at all? But if you have it, because I could just plug myself in and the image would just appear. But it would be a very large-headed, multi-armed robot, I think, because I need the hard drive space up there to keep. I think that would be super simple. I don't know. That's
Yeah,
probably it. Either that or a little cute cat-esque.
as robot. Did when working with projects, did you ever feel like, oh my God, I don't know anymore. I have no more ideas for robots?
Oh, every day. Every day I have no ideas. I'm amazed that anybody wants to watch it or do like is interested in anything I do. But no, you know what? I think that there's so many small variations that can happen. And it's really about the story, right? And the story will pull those ideas out. So, if you look at most things in the world, there are only so many variations of that thing. And it doesn't matter what it is. Even
Mm.
people, right? I mean, I've seen so many Italian versions of my Japanese friends. It's ridiculous. Like it's just, you know what I mean? Everybody kind of shares little features. So when you see, I think it's infinite amount of ideas. If you're drawing, I don't know how many trash collecting robots you can draw. You know what I mean? I think there's a limit, right? But if in the world and in tasks, that the amount of tasks that one could design a robot for is infinite, right? So robots are one of those things that I think will be our best hope for exploring the universe. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? When we get off this planet, because we were built here, but robots can be built to survive anywhere, right? We're not limited by our they're not limited by our bubble.
Yeah.
So the universe is infinite. So the amount of things out there for the robot to need to do and to explore, I think I could challenge. I mean, I think it'll always look like me, like I did it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a thing. And I love that idea of setting kind of a style. Like it's interesting to see on March of Robots, people are learning to draw and they're adopting my shape language and joint language. It's fun to watch, and see people
Mm.
do that. It's great. But yeah, I don't think I could ever really run out of ideas. I always worry at the beginning that I have no ideas, but it turns out I actually do have a lot.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, just going through Instagram, and there are just like so many robots. And some have very simple shapes. I think you have like an egg robot, and it still looks like a robot. So if you have one tip to make a robot look more like a robot, what would that be?
I was joking, if you put a seam line on anything, it becomes a robot, right? Like really, that's the thing, because I think that the idea of you can take a drawing of a human, a beautifully rendered, realistic, hyper-realistic picture of a person, and if you draw a seam line across their throat or along their cheek, like it's supposed to be a little hatch or something, automatically they become an android. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the great thing about that kind of idea. It doesn't take much to communicate, because you could imagine the seam line, and then you would just peel the seam line back, and then wonderfully textured um, subsurface scattering silicon skin reveals blinky glowy lights, and it's there are things characteristically that, oh, that's definitely a robot. It's made of plastic, made of metal, made of wood, and it's stiff joints, and you can see those things. Those are the clear calls for something to be a robot. It has segments and components, and kind of is designed as a thing, as opposed to putting a hard drive with some kind of motors in it in a bowl of Jello. Is that a robot? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything could be anything. It's really about what's beneath what's the reveal, right? So there's, like in the classic movie Blade Runner. I mean, the replicants, they look like humans, right? But it's what's below the surface.
All right. Okay. That's, I think, all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much. That was a great chat.
Awesome. I'm glad. I hope somebody got something out of it. My 2 cents. Feel free to give back change.
I thank you so much, and I hope everyone's going to participate in March of Robots.
And thank you very much for the invite. It's fantastic. It's great to have Clip Studio to talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joanna, and thank you so much, DaCosta. This has been a very inspiring webinar. And we also appreciate a lot to everyone who's still with us here on the webinar. We'll also like to remind you that for more information about Clip Studio Paint, just visit us on our website, clipstudiopaint.net/n and graphixly.com. Also, this webinar is being recorded and we'll share it on our social media soon. Please follow Celsius Web and also Graphixly, Celsius YouTube channel, and also Graphixly YouTube channel. And for more information about DaCosta and all of his projects, please follow him on Instagram and just check his website, chocolatesoup.com.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joanna and DaCosta. And before finishing the broadcast, I would like you to remember that during the month of March, we are supporting DaCosta and the March of Robot Drawing Challenge. We encourage you to participate on this fun challenge and also with several giveaways that will be happening during the month. And last but not least, as an attendee, you have a chance to win 1 copy of Clip Studio Paint X and 2 superhero brush sets. So winners will be drawn randomly from the list of the event's attendees and will be announced after the webinar. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to see you again in our next events. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.